He was born in a wooden cabin deep inside the cold forests of Kentucky. No silver spoons, no warm blankets, just the sound of the wind and a mother's tired hands. His name was Abraham Lincoln, a boy whose world was smaller than his dreams. His father, Thomas, was a hard-working farmer. His mother, Nancy, a gentle soul who taught him kindness before she left him forever when he was just 9. That loss, that emptiness, became the first shadow that followed him all his life. Abraham had no book, no teachers, but he had fire. He would borrow books from neighbors, walk miles barefoot, and read them under the dim light of a fire log. The words became his world, and knowledge his only weapon. He wasn't the smartest boy. He wasn't the strongest either, but he had something rare, a hunger to rise above his pain. People laughed at him for dreaming too big. A poor boy talking about laws, justice, and freedom? It sounded foolish, but every insult became fuel. Every night, he promised himself, one day I'll prove that even a poor boy can stand taller than kings. He worked as a rail splitter, a store clerk, a postman, a farmhand, anything to survive. But no matter how dirty his hands got, his thoughts stayed clean. He never learned hatred. He learned patience. Sometimes, late at night, he'd look at the stars and whisper, "Is there really a place for someone like me in this world?" He didn't know it yet, but those nights of loneliness were shaping the heart of a man who would one day heal a broken nation. Because before he ever led a country, he first learned to lead himself through pain. Deep years passed, and the boy from the cabin walked into the noisy streets of Illinois. A man now, tall, quiet, and thoughtful. He didn't wear fine clothes. He didn't own much, but he carried something far greater: honesty, humility, and an unshakable belief in fairness. Lincoln started his life in politics not as a powerful man, but as a listener. He listened to farmers who couldn't feed their families. He listened to slaves who had no voice, and he listened to his own heart, which told him that every human being deserved freedom. He studied law, not in schools, but by candlelight, alone. Page after page, he taught himself what justice meant. And when he stood in court, his voice wasn't loud, but it carried truth. People called him Honest Abe. He never asked for that title. He earned it. But honesty has a price. The more he spoke the truth, the more enemies he made. Powerful men called him naive. Others mocked his look, his clothes, even his kindness. But Lincoln never fought back with anger. He fought back with patience. Then came the storm, the darkest chapter in America's history: slavery, a nation divided by color, greed, and hate. Lincoln saw it not as a political issue, but as a human wound. When he ran for president, few believed he could win. A poor boy from nowhere. How could he lead a nation? But history loves the brave. In 1861, Abraham Lincoln took the oath as the 16th president of the United States, and that oath came with fire. The southern states refused his rule. They broke away. The Civil War began. Brother against brother, blood against blood. Lincoln didn't want war. He wanted peace. But sometimes peace demands war, and every decision tore him apart inside. He'd spend nights alone, walking through the White House halls, haunted by letters from mothers who had lost their son. He read each one. He answered many himself with trembling hands. He once said, "I have been driven many times upon my knees by the overwhelming conviction that I had nowhere else to go." He wasn't made of steel. He was made of pain, but shaped by purpose. In 1863, he took a step that would change the world forever: the Emancipation Proclamation. With one signature, he declared that every slave in America was free. The ink was still wet when the threat threats began. Assassination plots, hate letters, isolation. But Lincoln didn't stop. He once told a friend, "If slavery is not wrong, nothing is wrong." While the war raged on, his own heart was breaking. His young son, Willie, died in the White House. Lincoln didn't speak for days. Witnesses said they heard him crying alone at night. That pain, that loss, it made him understand every parent who lost a child in war. To the public, he was the president. To himself, he was a grieving father, carrying the weight of thousands of families. He'd often visit the soldiers' hospitals, sit by their beds, hold their hands, listen to their last words. He didn't see ranks or uniforms. He saw sons. He saw humanity. And yet, as the war reached its end, Lincoln never sought revenge. He sought healing. He once said, "With malice toward none, with charity for all." He wanted to rebuild a broken country, not through power, but through forgiveness. Because he knew real leadership isn't about ruling others. It's about understanding their pain. As the Union Army began to win, he smiled again, a tired smile, the kind that hides years of sorrow. He had done what no one thought possible. He had held a divided nation together. But deep down, he knew peace always asks for a price, and soon that price would be him. Deep, the Civil War was ending. The smoke of 4 years of bloodshed was slowly clearing from the American sky. More than 600,000 men were gone. The nation was broken, but still breathing. And at the center of it all stood a man who looked older than his years, his face carved with lines of pain and hope. Abraham Lincoln had won the hardest war, but not against an enemy, rather against hate itself. His Emancipation Proclamation had become more than a law. It became a new heartbeat for America. For the first time, the word freedom belonged to everyone. Thousands of freed men and women knelt down and prayed for the man who had given them a future. But Lincoln didn't celebrate. He said softly, "I do not feel that I have done any great thing. I only did what my conscience told me was right." In 1864, he was re-elected as president, something even he didn't expect. When people cheered his name, he turned to his aides and said, "God alone knows how much this victory has cost this poor nation." The war still burned in its final corners, and Lincoln worked day and night, meeting generals, studying maps, and writing speeches that could heal instead of divide. He refused to humiliate the South. He wanted to forgive them. He wanted them home. He told his cabinet, "We must bind up the nation's wounds, not open new ones." That became the soul of his second inaugural address, a speech that would go down in history as one of the most powerful ever spoken. He said, "With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace." People wept. Soldiers in torn uniforms listened in silence. Even his enemies said, "This man's heart is bigger than his country." But history, cruel as it is, was already writing its final page for him. On April 9th, 1865, General Robert E. Lee surrendered to General Ulysses S. Grant. The Civil War was finally over. For the first time in years, Lincoln could breathe. He smiled again. He even joked with his wife, Mary, saying, "We must both try to be happy now. The war is over." He talked about traveling after leaving office, about seeing the West, about living a simple life again, something he hadn't known since his days as a young lawyer. But deep inside, he carried a strange calm, as if he knew his time was almost done. On April 14th, 1865, Good Friday, Lincoln attended a play at Ford's Theater in Washington. He was relaxed, even joyful, something rare for him. He laughed. He whispered to Mary, "How beautiful the play is tonight." And then, one gunshot, a sound that froze history forever. John Wilkes Booth, an actor-turned-assassin, pulled the trigger behind Lincoln's head. The laughter stopped. The stage turned silent. Chaos filled the room. Lincoln was carried across the street to a small boarding house. Doctors surrounded him, but they already knew the wound was fatal. He never regained consciousness. At 7:22 a.m., April 15, 1865, Abraham Lincoln took his final breath. A soldier standing by his bed whispered, "Now he belongs to the ages." The news spread like wildfire. People wept in the streets, black and white, rich and poor, together for the first time, united by grief. Church bells rang across the nation. Cities went silent. America had lost its soul. But even in death, Lincoln's presence only grew. The train that carried his body back to Illinois became a moving river of tears. At every stop, thousands gathered, holding flowers, singing hymns, whispering his name. Farmers left their fields. Mothers held their children high just to see the passing coffin. It wasn't just a funeral. It was a nation saying thank you. His achievements, the living legacy. He preserved the Union when everyone thought it was impossible. He ended slavery, not just in law, but in spirit. He proved that a leader's greatest strength is not power, but compassion. He gave democracy its true meaning, a government of the people, by the people, for the people. But beyond politics, beyond history books, Lincoln's real victory was that he remained human. He felt every pain, every doubt, every fear, and still chose kindness. He could have been bitter. He could have ruled through revenge. Instead, he forgave those who hated him, even the South that killed him. That's not just leadership. That's humanity at its highest form. Unseen fact, few know. Lincoln dreamed of his own death just days before the assassination. He told his bodyguard that he saw himself lying in a coffin at the White House. It wasn't fear, it was acceptance. Despite being tall and strong, Lincoln suffered from severe depression all his life. He often said, "I am the most miserable man living." But he hid that sadness behind humor and empathy, never letting it make him cruel. He loved storytelling. Even during the war, he told funny stories to his staff to lighten the darkness around them. He kept important letters in his hat, literally inside his tall hat, because he said his head was the safest place in Washington. And though he was president, he never forgot his roots. He once refused to kick out a poor farmer who came to see him without an appointment. He said, "I know how it feels to be turned away. Let the man in." The final thought. Abraham Lincoln didn't just change America. He changed what it means to be human in power. He showed the world that kindness is not weakness, that forgiveness is not surrender, and that even in death, a man's spirit can light up generations. He began as a poor boy who read by firelight and ended as a light himself, one that will never die. In the end, he once said, "It is not the years in your life that matter, it's the life in your years." And for Abraham Lincoln, those years still shine on in every free heart that remembers him.